Now it's time to bring back in my co-host and good friend, Jeff Small, as well as an enormous friend of the income generation, Steve Forbes, Chairman, Editor-in-Chief of Forbes Media. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, David and Jeff. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, our pleasure. You know, when we spoke back in April, you had certainly praised the president about, letting each state make the decision on whether they close down, they reopen, and so on. That was the direction I think you actually wanted him to go more in, and that's the direction we ended up going in. And of course, that now we're seeing where some states are doing a better job than others. So what do you think the states have learned from all this in terms of, hopefully not having another significant flare-up before they find a vaccine?
Well, I think you're seeing various states do various things. Some do it right, some do it wrong. Right now, Florida is under a lot of criticism, but the fact of the matter is back in March, Florida Governor DeSantis made the decision not to put patients in nursing homes. New York did just the opposite, unnecessarily caused the deaths of 10,000 people, putting them in the nursing homes with those infections, which spread like wildfire. So even though Florida's had a real bad flare-up, if you look at the actual numbers, the death toll is going to be a fraction of what you had in New York. So some states got it more right, and there's now real controversy about lockdowns, how effective they are. And so there's still a lot to learn, which means we should all be praying for those treatments and those vaccines coming as soon as possible, because we need it. We need them.
I know. No kidding. Hallelujah. Our show today, as you know, is about financial literacy and how, unfortunately, a lot of America doesn't have the level of financial literacy that Jeff and I believe they should, and probably that you believe they should. So as someone who essentially has dedicated a good part of his life to that through Forbes magazine and other sources, when you look at what's going on today in the financial markets and the stock market and the economy, what words of wisdom would you bestow upon our income generation members, those of us who are retired or within 10 years of retirement that are watching the show?
Well, the key thing is trying to determine what kind of environment we're going to have in this country economically come January 20th of next year. We could have we have two very stark different paths that we could take. One is cutting taxes and continuing with deregulation, which is the only way to get this economy really growing again. Or the other side, the Democrats seem addicted to massive tax increases, massive new rules and burdens on businesses, which will hurt business startups and job creation. So in terms of investment, I'm a little surprised the markets haven't priced in more of the uncertainty of how these elections are going to turn out. And because you couldn't have two more stark choices than what face us now in terms of the two political parties.
And I know Jeff has some stuff lined up about politics and the election and everything he wants to ask you. But before we do that, I want to ask you, though, in most elections, people use as an excuse about this time of year, well, I'm not going to make any decisions on any financial changes until after the election. And most of the time, that's a silly thing to say because the election doesn't change a ton. Usually there's division in Congress, so the president doesn't quite have enough power. But this time, do you think it's different? Do you think it could really affect people's personal investment decisions, because of this one issue you highlighted?
Yes, very much so. And even if a president comes in, let's say Biden wins the election or some other Democrat wins the election, what you're going to see is they can do a lot by executive orders. They can do a lot by regulations. They can do a lot by pushing regulatory agencies. As you know, regulatory agencies pass over 3,000 rules a year, which is the equivalent of federal law. Congress may pass 120, 150 laws a year. So even if the Democrats don't get control of the Senate, they can do a lot of harm to the economy just from the executive branch and the influence the executive branch has on these regulatory agencies. So yes, this election, you couldn't have more real differences between the two parties than what is facing us.
Yeah, and raising taxes in this economy would be devastating for sure. Jeff, politics?
Well, yeah, Steve, I completely agree with everything you're saying. Those are all really good points. What we see right now is how I see this election as being really the most important election of the last 100 years. Because if we go to the left, We know we're going to see the outsourcing of jobs, the economy is going to shrink, taxes are going to go up. But if we go to the right and we stick with deregulations and lower taxes and economic expansion, America's really benefit much more severely that way. Why doesn't the left get that? Why don't they embrace the America First politics, which is getting everybody to go to work? Why are they so anti-America First? Why do they do that? It makes no sense to me.
And Steve,
Well,
Jeff, we need to. This is like icing the kicker in football. We need to take a commercial break, which means you, our viewers and listeners, have to stay tuned because you'll hear the answer to that question from Steve Forbes just after the break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Now it's welcome back my good friend and co-host Jeff Small, as well as the Income Generation's good friend Steve Forbes, Chairman, Editor-in-Chief of Forbes Media. So Steve, to finish up the question that Jeff asked right before the break, why is it in these areas that Democrats don't seem to get it?
Because to them, it's about power. They want power, and they think the economy will just do well by them saying so, throwing in some more money. They have no conception of what makes an economy work, what enables people to start businesses, enables people to get more skills and move up the income ladder. That is just out of their sphere of understanding. So they think they're doing right by putting in more controls. They think they're helping people by doing what they're doing. And they don't realize, and sadly we may pay a price for it if they get in, that by what they're doing, they're going to hurt most those who have the least, because they're not going to get an opportunity to get those jobs. They're not going to get an opportunity to move up the ladder earning more income. They're going to crush it. And so I think if these bad guys get in, 2022 congressional elections, there'll be a huge turnover. But in the meantime, we're going to pay an unnecessarily severe price. But it's about power. They want control.
Steve, will they get into the White House in November?
Well, I still think the polls are not quite right about Donald Trump. I think voters are going to be really focusing now on the elections. And if the president focuses on what he wants to do in the next 4 years, he will win, especially as the Democrats now. It's very funny, David and Jeff. They're starting to talk about, do we really need these debates? You know, they don't matter much anyway, because they know their guy can't withstand an hour and a half of real severe questioning. And they can't, they used to have presidential candidates campaign from the porch, front porch campaigns 120 years ago. This is the first basement campaign in American history. They don't want their guy out there because he won't be able to stand up. And people are going to say, why did they put that guy up as their nominee?
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre that that's the best that they can do cognitively, because it's very clear to even the Democrats, they're trying to control him and they're keeping him. They won't let him make announcements or do press conferences by himself now. They're keeping him under wraps. It's pretty clear that Joe really is a shadow of himself, and there's something cognitively going on there. And it's bizarre that we have that for a Democratic candidate in this election, Steve. It makes no sense to us.
Well, they put him up. And by the way, he is a man more of the left than his image indicates. But they put him up because they really feared, rightly so, that Bernie Sanders was about to take the nomination. Remember, back in March, Bernie had started to do very well. He won the Nevada caucuses by an overwhelming margin. And they thought he was going to do to the Democrats what Donald Trump did to the Republicans 4 years before. So an amazing number of days, the Democrat establishment got the other candidates to withdraw. I'd love to see how they push that through. They anointed Biden. They got him through the South Carolina primary and got him through. And one thing he did do in his debate with Bernie Sanders after this steamroller started is Biden got pumped up and he held his own sort of for an hour, and that was the end of Bernie Sanders. So, but can he hold up for an hour and a half, 3 times in the debates? I'm not so sure. But he hasn't gotten any better. But they chose Biden because they found no one else there that they thought could use to stop Bernie Sanders. That's the way to put it. Use to stop Bernie Sanders.
Well, you brought up a really good point. They've painted him too as a moderate, and he's really not. He's embracing the Sanders platform and the progressive platform. He's really not a moderate. That's kind of snake oil, don't you think, Steve?
Really is. And when you propose $3 trillion, the number's so big you can't even comprehend it. But when you propose a massive tax increases, taxes are a price and a burden. And when you have less to spend, less to save, less to invest, the economy hurts. But some people are slow learners. And what's happened in Democrat primaries with some of these congressional candidates, the left is now dominating that party. That's why Chuck Schumer is not going to do any. He's so fearful that AOC is going to run against him in 2022 in the primary. So the party's capitulated to the far left because they fear that they'll get knocked out in a primary if they're not sufficiently left wing.
So,
Steve,
we have 1 minute left or so, but bringing it back to our viewers and our listeners. Okay, so if Trump gets in, then stock market could continue to climb upward in theory for a while. What if Biden gets in? What words of real-world financial advice would you give our income generation members if the elections go to the left in November?
Just remember what Lincoln said in a very different context: "This too shall pass." We'll take a hit short term, but I think you're going to see the forces of moderation, the forces of Americanism, conservatism, really get strengthened and rise up and start fighting on the economic front, political front, cultural front in ways that has not happened before. So in terms of your retirement plans, don't go and sell because you can't time these things. Markets look to the future. And even though Biden's election will be a bad short-term future, I think it's going to set the stage for a real rebound when he starts to suffer reverses, as they will, because the country is not as left as the Democrat Party, not by a long shot.
Yeah, that's true. It's just... let's hope that the president can get it back on track over the next few months and bring some of those moderates that he's lost, back to the center. So, Steve, as usual, it's been our pleasure. Thank you very much for being part of the show.
David, thank you for letting me on, and good luck. Keep up the good fight, and Jeff, you too. And we'll see what happens in November.
Yes, sir.
And most important, stay healthy. We want to have you back on. And you stay with us and you stay healthy too. We'll be back here in a moment with much more on the income generation. I'm David Scranton, and we'll be right back.